and the fact that our people are not learning or understanding spiritual scriptures. As a nation, we are spending more and more in real terms on the education of our young, and at the same time, these students are graduating with lower abilities in math, science, reading, English, geography, civics, and history, the basics. Many of these same students are graduating from our high schools and even universities with emotional outlooks of apathy and detachment concerning their communities and our nation. Let us first take an objective look at where our public education system is, and then we can see how our educational system has been manipulated. In 1983, the National Commission on Excellence in Education spent 18 months studying our school systems and issued the famous report, Nation at Risk. The bottom line, according to this report, was,
the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and as a people.
The Presidential Commission on Education then added these words of harsh reality.
If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves.
Since 1983, school districts have been throwing huge amounts of money at these issues in hopes that the problems will go away. School district taxation, together with new federal funding, has increased at rates many times faster than inflation and student population would warrant. As an example, the Austin Independent School District, the AISD, has increased tax levies by more than 650% in 12 years. This is an astounding increase in taxation. This school district is now spending more than $7,200 per student annually. The amazing comparison is that the AISD spending is small potatoes when measured up with some other school districts around the nation. The Washington, D.C. school district spends more than $10,000 per student per year, and yet after spending all of this money, the D.C. high school graduates test at very low levels. Using the example of AISD, if the average homeroom class size is 20, conservative, then they are spending over $144,000 per classroom. If you take the classroom teacher's salary and benefits and add on to this the prorated salaries of the other teachers, physical education, music, art, etc., the principal, counselors, and office support workers who have direct contact with the students, you will see that this school district is spending over $75,000 per class, per grade, per school for administration and non-direct spending. This is an astonishing waste of money, and these type of spending amounts and ratios are happening all over the country. With all of these expenditures, are we getting positive results? According to the recent National Education Goals Panel,
1 in 5 fourth graders met math performance standards and only 1 in 4 eighth graders measured up. Only 1 in 4 fourth graders met needed reading standards of accomplishment.
At the same time, standard SAT and ACT college entrance exam scores have gone down almost yearly. In 1941, when the SAT test was first instituted, the average score was 500 for verbal and math skills. Since 1941, SAT scores have consistently been going down, astounding. Yet if one asks almost any school board member, they will point out that they have seen some positive improvements in testing scores. What they may forget to tell you is that in 1994, the SAT average score was recalibrated. The average verbal score had dropped to 424, and the average math score had dropped to 478. The test was then recentered so that once again the average scores were 500, so that the scores would look better. Think about this. Now, add on to this the growing hue and cry from many liberal Democratic politicians to throw out the SAT scores because they claim the test is racist. In fact, these tests are standardized reflections of educational skills that students of every color need to learn to be ready for a university education and accomplish some basic life skills. The only racists are those who would deny that our national education system has failed and are standing in the way of giving our nation's youth of every color the quality education they deserve. Through their denial or political desire to protect the status quo, they have blocked all responsible reforms to bring discipline, higher standards, ethics, and moral values back into our public school system. Many people ask, how did this ever happen? To understand how our school systems have been taken over, it is necessary to be aware of a group called the frontier thinkers, or also known as the progressivists. Their leader was a man by the name of John Dewey. Dewey was the head of the well-known Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City. Mr. Dewey was a hardcore atheist and political socialist. His book, The Humanist Manifesto I, released in 1934, is the wellspring for today's educational philosophy of a group called the Frontier Thinkers. How did this ever happen? To understand a generation of school superintendents and college and university leaders. In the 1930s, Ruggs and Counts engineered the takeover of the National Education Association, the NEA, the most influential teaching organization in our nation. Counts and Ruggs called for the destruction of free enterprise and of using our schools to create a new social order based upon the philosophy of humanism and statism. In the 1960s, the second generation of frontier thinkers knew they had accomplished many of their goals when Federal District Judge Melinda Harmon issued this decision.
Parents give up their rights when they drop children off at public school.
Today, many of our school superintendents are skillful politicians who say all of the politically right things. Yet, most of them would stumble if asked in a school board meeting these two very simple questions. Who are we as human beings? And what is the purpose of life? Many of these so-called professional educators would dance around and then probably say something like, "This board doesn't deal with questions like that." Unless one knows that human beings have souls and that our purpose is to consciously manifest our highest spiritual potential, we are at a loss when it comes to practical direction. Thus, when we see many of the leaders of our school boards and the educational intelligentsia operating from a socialistic and humanistic philosophy, we can understand how our school systems have been allowed to decay. The purpose of education is not to create another cog for the industrial wheel. The real purpose of education is to teach our children character, ethics, and personal responsibility, and education in human values. Understand, this is not an attack on the many tens of thousands of wonderful teachers we have in this nation. American public school teachers need to realize that they too are being used by the association that is supposedly their advocate. 40 years ago, teacher salaries often accounted for more than 60% of the yearly school budget. Today, we see that in many cases, teacher salaries account for less than 40% of the yearly budget. Even though the budgets have increased radically, the teachers are relatively making less. The lion's share of the money is going to feed the ever-increasing bureaucracy and pay debt service. In fact, this is a call to all of these dedicated teachers to stand up for what they know to be right and rebel against the NEA. It is essential that we first educate ourselves, our friends, family, and local teachers about the waste of time, energy, and money in our schools. Then we need to take back our educational system one PTA at a time, one school at a time, and one school board at a time.